The villagers wrapped her in a torn cloth, her skin pale as moonlight against the dark forest floor. They left her there, a newborn albino girl, believing her curse would die with her. They were wrong. 25 years later, a private jet landed on a dust airstrip. She stepped out, a pharmaceutical billionaire, holding the patent to the only drug that could stop the epidemic ravaging her home village. This is Amara. Her condition, albinism, made her a target in a place where myth overrules medicine. Now, she holds the cure to a fever that has already claimed dozens of her own kin. But to get it, the elders who condemned her must ask for mercy. This is the story of a curse reversed and the devastating choice between revenge and redemption. It began not with a cry, but with a silence. In a remote village where the rustle of leaves carried more weight than any law, a child's fate was decided before she drew her first breath. The midwife took one look at the infant's milky skin and white hair, crossed herself, and backed away. Word spread like brushfire. The curse had been born. Her mother, Adana, pleaded through tears. She was just a baby, but old man Kofi, the village elder whose word was final, stood unmoved at the hut's entrance. The sun had not set on a 0-0 child here in 70 years. They bring drought, they wither crops, their touch spoils the milk. He spoke not with anger, but with a cold certainty forged by generations of fear. The ancestors are clear. She cannot stay for 3 days, a tense standoff. Adana hid with her daughter, while the men gathered under the great baobab tree. The argument wasn't about murder, it was about exile. To spill the blood of a cursed one within the village boundaries would bring catastrophe. The forest, however, was a different matter. The forest had its own gods, its own justice. It was the perfect silent solution. On the 4th night they came, not with torches but with moonlight as their guide. 2 of Kofi's sons entered the hut while Adana slept, exhausted from weeping. They gently, swiftly, took the swaddled infant. They did not look at her face. To them they were not handling a child, but removing a threat, a dangerous object. They walked for hours deep into the territory where the village hunters rarely ventured. The air grew cold. Strange sounds echoed. Here they laid the bundle at the base of a massive twisted tree. One of them placed a small gourd of water beside her, a final conflicted gesture toward a conscience not fully erased. Then they turned and vanished into the gloom, believing they had saved their home. But the forest was not empty. It was watched. Eleanor Shaw was an epidemiologist mapping mosquito populations for a European health NGO. Her camp was a mile east. That morning, following an odd bird call, she stumbled upon the clearing. At first she thought it was discarded rags. Then she saw the tiny pale hand move. Her shock turned to fury, then to a fierce protective resolve. She wrapped the infant in her own jacket, radioed her base for immediate evacuation, and made a decision that would override all protocol. This child was not a data point. She was a survivor. Eleanor named her Amara. It meant grace in Igbo. She fought bureaucratic hurdles, forged documents, and used her life savings to adopt her. They left the continent for a world of sterile labs and private schools. Eleanor taught her daughter 2 things above all: that her skin was a genetic condition, not a curse, and that science was the language with which she would one day answer the world. Amara was a prodigy, driven by a silent, burning question of origin. She devoured biology and chemistry. She earned her PhD in immunology at 24. Her focus, rare genetic conditions and targeted therapies. Her groundbreaking work on modifying enzyme pathways caught the attention of a major pharmaceutical giant. They offered her a lab, a team, and a blank check. It was there, developing a treatment for a niche metabolic disease, that she made her accidental world-changing discovery. A compound meant to repair cellular receptors showed a stunning secondary effect. It acted as a broad-spectrum antiviral shield, neutralizing a whole class of hemorrhagic fevers. She patented it. It made her a billionaire before she turned 30. Meanwhile, a different fever found its way to her birthplace. It started with a trader returning from a city to the north. A headache, a high fever, then bleeding from the gums. It spread through the village with terrifying speed. The local clinic was overwhelmed. Modern medicine was days away over impossible roads. The elders consulted the diviner. The bones were cast. The answer was a thunderclap of dread. The forest had returned the curse they had cast out. The fever was Amara's vengeance. They had been wrong to leave her alive. Panic solidified into dogma. They refused outside help, trusting only in bitter herbal brews that did nothing. A health worker from the regional district, risking his own safety, managed to get a blood sample out. The diagnosis was Lassa fever, the same strain Amara's new drug, dubbed Amarin, could eradicate in a matter of days. The news alert was a footnote in a medical journal. Cluster of Lassa cases, isolated village, resistance to aid. The village's name was the key that unlocked a lifetime of buried memories. Eleanor had kept a file, a single photograph of the clearing, the coordinates scribbled in her field notes. Amara stared at the molecule rotating on her screen, the elegant solution that could save them. Then she looked at the photo of the twisted tree. The two images fused in her mind, forming a perfect, painful equation. She owned the cure, and they had left her to die. Her corporate board advised a press release, a charitable donation through intermediaries. It was the safe, soulless play. Amara shut down the meeting. She instructed her pilot to file a flight plan. She was going herself. Back in the village, old man Kofi coughed blood into a bowl. His son, now a father himself, whispered the news he'd heard on a crackling radio. The Zuru child was coming back. Not as a ghost, but as a chief of the white coat people. She had the medicine. Kofi closed his eyes, the weight of his long life pressing down. He had chosen the forest to avoid a reckoning. Now the forest was sending the reckoning to his doorstep. The elders gathered not in strength, but in a sickened fear. They had to decide, would they stand by the old stories and die, or would they break the greatest taboo of all and beg? The jeep kicked up a plume of red dust on the road that hadn't existed when she was born. Amara watched the thatched roofs appear through the acacia trees, her hands steady, her heart a drum of silent thunder. She carried no guards, only a single briefcase. Inside, vials of clear liquid held more power than any witch doctor's potion. The entire village, though still able to stand, had gathered in the central clearing. A wall of faces, thin with disease and hardened with terror. They parted as she stepped out, the sun glaring off her tailored white suit. A collective gasp. She was a phantom made flesh, a walking impossibility. Old man Kofi was helped forward, a shell of the man who had pronounced her fate. He looked at this vision of power, this daughter of the forest in designer sunglasses, and the world he knew shattered. He opened his mouth to speak, to justify, to condemn. Amara removed her glasses. Her violet eyes, sensitive to the light, met his directly. She did not speak to the crowd. She spoke only to him, her voice clear and cutting through the heavy air. You told my mother I would bring death to this village. She paused, letting the memory hang between them. Then she lifted the briefcase. Now you tell me, do you still think I'm cursed? The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the dry, hacking cough of a child in the crowd. Kofi could not answer. His eyes, clouded with fever and a dawning horror, dropped from hers to the briefcase. In that polished leather was a verdict more powerful than any he had ever delivered. The curse they feared had not arrived as a blight, but as a choice they were too weak to make for themselves. Amara did not wait for his surrender. She turned her gaze to the sick, to the mothers holding listless children, to the men leaning on sticks for support. The treatment requires a clean space, sterile needles, and clean water, she announced, her voice cutting the thick air. You will prepare the schoolhouse now. It was not a request, it was an instruction from a world that operated on efficiency, not ritual. For a moment, no one moved, trapped between the old authority crumbling before them and the terrifying new one issuing commands. Then a young man, Kofi's own grandson, Samuel, stepped forward. He had been sent to the city for a year, had seen ambulances and white walls. He met Amara's eyes and gave a single, sharp nod. I will help, he said. That first crack in the village's unity was all it took. Others, desperate and seeing a tangible thread of hope, followed. They cleared the benches from the dusty schoolroom. They brought buckets of water boiled over fires. Amara, working with a focused clinical fury, transformed the space. She unpacked her case, vials of Amarin, syringes, alcohol swabs, sharps containers, a mobile lab in a suitcase. She administered the first injection to a 9-year-old girl whose skin was burning to the touch. The mother flinched but held her child steady, her eyes fixed not on the needle but on Amara's face, searching for malice, finding only intense concentration. The process was methodical, relentless, one after another. The line stretched out the door, but the elders did not join the line. They retreated to Kofi's compound, a council of the doomed. The diviner, a man named Jelani, was frantic. "You see, she marks them. She puts her poison in their blood. This is how the curse truly works," he hissed. Kofi, shivering under a blanket, said nothing. He was remembering the gourd of water, a small mercy offered in the dark. Was this the forest's answer? A mercy so vast it felt like annihilation. News in places forgotten by fiber optic cables, travels on motorbikes and in whispers. By nightfall, word had reached the regional Ministry of Health. A foreign billionaire was practicing unlicensed medicine in a quarantine zone. The director, a pragmatic man named Okafor, was initially furious. Then he read the alert from his own desk. The drug was amarin. The billionaire was its inventor. The calculus changed instantly. He placed a call not to send police, but to offer support. Amara took the call outside under a blanket of stars she did not recognize. "You are causing a diplomatic incident," Okafor said, his tone careful. "There are protocols, permits." "The protocol is that 37 people here are dying," Amara replied, her voice cold. "The permit is my patent. What do you want?" Okafor paused. "We want to help, and we want an understanding. If this treatment works, the ministry would be grateful. Perhaps a partnership for distribution. A discounted rate for the nation." Amara understood. This wasn't about rules, it was about credit and control. She had just become a political fact. "Keep your officials back, send nurses, send supplies. We'll talk about gratitude later." She hung up. The world was already trying to swallow her act of reckoning, to turn it into a transaction. Back inside the schoolhouse, a miracle was unfolding. The first child treated, the 9-year-old girl, had broken her fever. She was sitting up, sipping broth, her eyes clear. A ripple of awe moved through the room, a sound more profound than cheers, a collective exhale. Samuel, who had been translating for Amara, watched her as she moved to the next cot. He saw the way her hands, so steady with a syringe, trembled slightly when she wiped the brow of an old woman. The mask of the scientist had a crack. He found her later, outside, staring into the forest that began just beyond the last hut. "You did not have to come," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she replied, not looking at him. "For revenge." Now she turned. In the moonlight, her features were both stark and soft. "For the answer," she said. "I have spent my life building an answer to a question I was too young to ask. Why was I not enough? Today I finally heard the question. It was never about me. It was always about their fear." And that she trailed off, looking back at the dark trees. "That is an answer that no drug can cure." The second day brought the outside world crashing in. A drone buzzed overhead. Then another. Journalists, tipped off by someone in the ministry, had hired pilots. The image was irresistible. The cursed billionaire, saving the village that rejected her. By midday, it was on satellite feeds. At her company's headquarters in Zurich, the board was in an uproar. The CEO, a man named Gerber, was on a frantic video call. "Amara, you are the face of this drug. You are now the face of a tribal conflict. The stock is volatile. Investors are asking if you're stable." Amara, taking the call on Samuel's cheap phone, stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching a man walk for the first time in a week. "Tell the investors the trial is a success. Tell them we have real-world urgent phase data, then tell them to be quiet. You are not a doctor in the field. You are the chief science officer, the liability alone." "What is their liability?" she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. "The children who died waiting for your risk assessments. Log this as a corporate humanitarian intervention. Brand it, sell it, I don't care. But do not call me again to complain about good press." She ended the call. The corporate machinery would now try to commodify her pain, to package her redemption arc. Let them try. She had a more immediate problem. Jelani, the diviner, had not been idle. While the treated recovered, he preached to the fearful who remained in their huts, those too loyal or too terrified to cross the elders. He declared the medicine a trick, a sorcery that would steal their souls after saving their bodies. He performed a counter-ritual at the village edge. chanting and scattering ashes to ward off Amara's white magic. The village was splitting in two along a new fault line, those who saw a miracle and those who saw a more sophisticated curse. The tension erupted on the third morning. Amara was preparing to treat Kofi's own wife when Jelani stepped into the schoolhouse doorway, blocking the light. "You will not touch her," he stated, his voice trembling with performative courage. "You take her. You take the soul of this village." Samuel moved to block him, but Amara put a hand out. She walked slowly toward Jelani, stopping a few feet away. She didn't shout. She spoke so only he and the closest few could hear. "You are a very small man," she said, her tone devoid of anger, full of a pity that was more devastating. "You trade in fear because you have nothing else to sell. My medicine is in that vial. What is yours in?" She pointed past him, to Kofi's compound. "He is dying. Your elder, your chief, the man you claim to protect. My medicine can save him in 8 hours. Your chants have done nothing for him in 8 days. So you tell me, Jelani, who is killing this village?" The diviner's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The logic was an anvil on his fragile authority. He looked around, the people in the cots, the families waiting. They were not looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with a new, dangerous emotion, impatience. He stumbled back then, turned and fled. That afternoon, Samuel led Amara to Kofi's hut. The old man was barely conscious, his breathing a wet rattle. His wife knelt beside him, weeping. She looked up at Amara, and in her eyes was not a plea, but a surrender. She silently moved aside. Amara knelt, preparing the injection as she cleaned a patch of skin on his frail arm. Kofi's eyes fluttered open. He focused on her, on the vial, on the impossible reality of his salvation being administered by the ghost he created. A single muddled tear tracked through the dust on his cheek. "The water," he whispered, the words barely audible. Amara paused. She understood, the gourd in the forest. His one tiny fragment of shame. It was not enough, she said quietly, and pressed the plunger. She stayed until his breathing eased into the deep rhythm of sleep, not of death. When she emerged, the village watched, holding its breath. The standoff was over. The last bastion had fallen. Amara had won. But winning the battle unleashed a new war within her. As she walked back to the schoolhouse, the weight of it all descended, the exhaustion, the roaring grief for the mother she never knew, the hollow echo of her triumph. She had forced them to accept her. She had proven her worth with a billion-dollar drug. So why did she feel so utterly, completely empty? Samuel found her sitting alone on the school steps, her head in her hands. He sat beside her, not speaking for a long time. Finally he said, "You asked if you were still cursed." They did not answer. "But I have a question for you, Amara. Now that you have your answer, are you free?" She had no reply. The cure was working. The fever was retreating, but a different sickness, one of history and heartbreak, had just been exposed, and she had no patent, no vial for that. She looked toward the dense wall of trees at the edge of the clearing, the beginning of the forest that had once been her tomb. A thought dark and compelling took root. To truly end this, she couldn't just be the savior who arrived from the sky. She had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the place where it all started. She stood up, her resolve crystallizing into a dangerous new plan. "I need to see it," she said to Samuel, her voice low. "Take me to the tree. Take me to where they left me to die." Samuel tried to refuse. "The forest is not a place for you, not now. Spirits are restless." Amara just looked at him, and in her gaze he saw the same unyielding resolve that had faced down the elders. "The only spirit I'm looking for is my own," she said, and she walked toward the tree line, leaving the saved village behind, stepping into the green dark where her story began. The forest swallowed sound, the distant cries of the market, the hum of a generator, all faded into a dense, living quiet. Samuel followed, his knowledge of the paths the only thread in the labyrinth. The air was cool, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight fought through the canopy and broken spears, illuminating swirling dust and flying insects. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory she didn't possess. "You understand," Samuel said, his voice low. "They did not do this from evil. They were afraid. The stories, they are older than any of us." "I know what they were," Amara replied, her eyes scanning the undergrowth. "I need to know what I am." After an hour of walking, Samuel stopped. He pointed to a massive ancient tree, its trunk twisted into a grotesque, grasping shape. Roots erupted from the ground like petrified serpents. There, he said, this is the place. The story is told. This is the tree of judgment. Amara stood still. Her heart, which had been steady through boardrooms and outbreaks, hammered against her ribs. This was it. A patch of mossy ground, dappled in faint light. The stage for her murder. She expected a wave of anger, of grief. Instead, she felt a profound, hollow stillness. She knelt, her white trousers staining with dark soil. She placed a hand on the cold, gnarled root. Nothing. No vision, no ghost, no cosmic answer, just dirt and old wood. Then her fingers brushed against something that wasn't natural. Tucked in a crevice of the root, wrapped in rotting leather, was a small bundle. Her breath caught. Samuel leaned in, eyes wide. That was not there before, I swear it. With careful hands, Amara unwrapped it. Inside was a faded, hand-stitched doll made of corn husks and dark thread, and a slip of paper brittle and brown. The ink was faded but legible. It was not in the local dialect, it was in English, a language her village did not write. She read it aloud, her voice a whisper in the silent woods. My daughter, if you find this, I am gone. They took you. Forgive me. Your name is Amara. You are loved. Adana. The world tilted. The note was not from Eleanor, her adoptive mother. It was from Adana, her birth mother. She had named her. She had loved her. She had come back. She had left a message for a future she could not possibly foresee. Samuel was staring at the doll, the corn husk that is from the harvest before the rains failed, the year you were born. My father said, Adana never stopped looking. They told her you were taken by a leopard. She disappeared into the forest one night and never returned. A new truth detonated in Amara's mind. Her mother had not acquiesced. She had fought. She had searched, and she had likely died out here, alone, looking for her. The story of passive abandonment was a lie. The real story was one of resistance and loss. The hollow stillness filled with a new, more personal grief. She had come for a confrontation with her persecutors. She found a message from her protector. The journey back was silent, the note burning in her pocket. When they emerged from the forest, the village was in an uproar. A convoy of gleaming SUVs and military jeeps was parked in the clearing. Men in crisp uniforms and suits stood talking with the recovering elders. At the center was Director Okafor from the ministry, and beside him a familiar, anxious face, Klaus Gerber, her company's CEO. Gerber spotted her and rushed over, his relief palpable. Amara, thank God. We've been coordinating with the ministry. A brilliant humanitarian success. We're spinning it as a landmark public-private partnership. He lowered his voice. But we must leave now. The situation is unstable. Okafor approached, his smile diplomatic. Dr. Shaw, your intervention has been remarkable. The ministry will be taking over the continued care. We have our own medical teams arriving. It is time for you to return to your important work. Amara looked past them. The villagers were being gently, but firmly, ushered away from the schoolhouse by junior officials. Her makeshift clinic was being dismantled. Her act was being sanitized, packaged, and taken from her. What is unstable? She asked Gerber, her voice flat. He glanced at Okafor, then back. The narrative. There are complications. The diviner Jelani. He has been speaking to the international press that found their way here. He is claiming you are not a savior, but a kidnapper, that you are stealing blood samples for occult purposes, that you used the village as a human trial without consent. It was a grotesque, brilliant inversion. The lie was spreading faster than the truth, and Amara pressed, and Okafor interjected smoothly, it is better for all if you depart. We will handle the rumors. Your company's continued cooperation in supplying Amarin is, of course, essential. She understood the deal. They were giving her an honorable exit. In return, they would control the drug distribution, the credit, and the narrative. She would be a benevolent ghost, not a living, complicating presence. At that moment, Samuel pushed through the officials. He ignored them, speaking directly to Amara. They are taking the remaining medicine. They say they will distribute it to The loading soldier looked at Okafor. The director's smile tightened. Dr. Shaw, be reasonable. We have a national strategy. My strategy is here, Amara said. Now, Gerber stepped in, panic in his eyes. Amara, the board is on the edge. If you are seen to be obstructing a national health authority, the legal repercussions, the stock collapse. She turned to him. Klaus, what is the first line of our corporate ethics statement? He blinked. To serve patient well-being above all. Then, act like it, she said. She turned to the growing crowd of villagers. The medicine you need is here, but so are the lies. They say I stole from you. They say I experimented on you. You have seen my work. You know your own bodies. So now you choose. Do you take the medicine that is here from my hand? Or do you wait for the ministry to send it back? Maybe next week, maybe never. It was a brutal public ultimatum. She was forcing the village to choose once and for all between the old fears and the new reality, and she was forcing the ministry's hand. Okafor's face darkened. This is unacceptable. You are inciting chaos. No, said a weak but clear voice. Old man Coffee, supported by his wife, shuffled forward. The treatment had worked. The fever was gone, leaving a frail but lucid man. He looked at Okafor, then at Amara. He did not look at her with gratitude, but with a weary, hard-won clarity. The girl, the woman, she asks a fair question, Kofi said, his voice carrying. We have waited for your clinics for 10 years. They never came. She came in 3 days. He paused, gathering his strength. The medicine stays. She stays. It was the final, absolute renunciation of the old ways. The elder had chosen the curse over the bureaucracy. Okafor was furious but outmaneuvered. In front of the cameras that had now emerged from the SUVs, he could not forcibly remove a Nobel-caliber scientist and a life-saving drug endorsed by the local chief. He gave a stiff nod. Very well, we will oversee the distribution locally. It was a retreat, however temporary. Gerber was ashen. The footage was already being beamed globally. The defiant billionaire, the supportive elder, the thwarted officials. The stock would swing wildly, but the brand was now forged in fire. That night, the atmosphere was different. The village held a gathering, not for her, but for themselves. A celebration of survival. Amara watched from the edge, the note from Adana folded in her hand. Samuel joined her, handing her a cup of sweet, hot tea. You found more than you came for, he said. I found a bigger question, she replied. My mother loved me. She fought for me. That changes everything. It means the original sin wasn't mine, and it wasn't fully theirs. It was a tragedy, not a myth. Samuel nodded. So what does the powerful Dr. Shaw do with that? Before she could answer, a young boy came running from the direction of the road, yelling. Headlights cut through the night. A single dusty sedan, not part of the official convoy, pulled in. The door opened. A woman stepped out, older, her face lined with a lifetime of sun and sorrow. She wore simple, worn clothes. She stood uncertainly, her eyes scanning the crowd, passing over Amara, then snapping back. The world stopped. The woman took a faltering step forward. She didn't speak. She just looked, her hand rising to her mouth. Her eyes, dark and deep, held a universe of pain and a desperate, impossible hope. Amara knew. In her bones, in the echo of the note, in the genetic mirror of the woman's gaze, she knew. The crowd fell silent. All the victories, the confrontations, the billions, the patents, they evaporated into the night air. The woman found her voice, a crack of sound across the quiet. Amara, she whispered, and in that one word whispered by a ghost from the forest, the entire journey shattered and reformed. The return to the village was over. A completely different story had just begun. The name, spoken in a voice she had never heard, yet knew in her blood, unraveled Amara completely. For 25 years, Mother had meant Eleanor, fierce, logical, saving her from the forest. Now here was the ghost from the trees made flesh. The woman, Adana, took another step, her eyes drinking in the impossible vision of her daughter alive, grown, glorious. They did not embrace. The distance between them was a canyon filled with a quarter-century of absence. Amara could only stare, the note in her hand, now a burning bridge to this living woman. "You left the doll," Amara finally said, her voice raw. Adana nodded, a tear tracing the dust on her cheek. "I searched for 3 days. They told me a leopard, but I felt you were alive. I went to the mission in the next region. I worked there, I waited, I prayed you would come back to the tree. It was all I could do." She had not died. She had exiled herself, living in limbo, clinging to a hope that defied all reason. The truth was more devastating than any tragedy. Her mother's love had been a constant silent force waiting in the wings of her life. Amara led her away from the staring crowd into the quiet of the schoolhouse. The questions tumbled out. The story Adana told was one of quiet, desperate resistance. She described her fight with Kofi, her nightly searches, her ultimate banishment for defying the ancestors. The neighboring Christian mission had taken her in, given her work, sheltered her. She learned some English. She heard rumors over the years of a famous albino doctor overseas. A seed of hope, too fragile to voice, took root. "Why now?" Amara asked. "Why come back now?" Adana looked at her, her gaze steady. The fever came, then the news on the missionary's radio. A woman with white skin and a cure was here. They said the name of the drug, Amarin. She pronounced it carefully. "I knew it was you. You took the name I gave you and made it into a blessing for the world. I had to see. I had to know if my daughter had become an angel of mercy or of vengeance." The choice Amara had presented the village was now reflected back at her through her mother's eyes. Who had she become outside? The village was reconciling this new seismic truth. The woman they had mourned and quietly blamed for bringing the curse was alive, and she had returned to the daughter they had cast out. The narrative of a simple curse was now impossibly tangled with threads of enduring love. Kofi, leaning on his son, asked to speak with Adana. The meeting was agonizing. He did not ask for forgiveness, he said. Simply, we were wrong. On that day, we were wrong. It was not an absolution, but an acknowledgement. The foundation of the old world cracked a little more. That night, Amara called Eleanor. She told her everything, the note, the doll, Adana's return. There was a long silence on the line. Then Eleanor's voice, thick with emotion, came through. "I always feared this day, not because I'd lose you, but because I couldn't protect you from that pain. She is your mother, Amara, and she must have suffered a hell I cannot imagine. Love is not a finite resource. There is room for both of us in your story. It was the final gift of a true mother, the freedom to embrace another." The next morning, Amara stood before the whole village for the last time. Adana stood slightly behind her, a quiet, solid presence. The change in the air was palpable. The fear was gone, replaced by a raw, uncertain awe. "The fever is broken," Amara announced. "But a sickness of the mind is harder to cure. You believed a child could be a curse. You were wrong. My own mother spent her life proving that." She paused, letting her eyes meet Kofi's, then Samuel's, then the faces of the children. "I will not take revenge. I will not make you beg. That is the old cycle, and it ends today. But I will not pretend nothing happened. So here is what I will do. She laid out her plan. She would fund the construction of a permanent modern clinic in the village, staffed by doctors who understood both modern medicine and local traditions. She would establish a scholarship in Adana's name for girls from the region to study science and medicine. And she would license the formula for Amarin to the ministry at cost on one condition: that the first distribution hubs be in villages like this one, places where superstition had cost lives. It was not a gift. It was an investment in a different future. It demanded something from them too. They had to accept the clinic, send their daughters to school, and break the chain of fear. Kofi, with Adana's silent presence beside him, agreed. It was a new covenant. As Amara prepared to leave, Adana faced her own choice. My place is here, she said to Amara. My pain is here. My healing must be here too. I will help build the clinic. I will be the bridge. Amara understood. She was not losing a mother. She was gaining a homeland. On the airstrip, Samuel approached Amara one last time. You asked if you were free, he said. Now I ask, are we? Amara looked at the village, at the clinic blueprint in her hand, at her mother talking with the elders. You are free to choose, she said. That's all any of us ever wanted. The jet climbed above the clouds, leaving the red earth behind. Amara looked at the briefcase beside her, now empty of vials but full of something else, a story with an ending and a beginning. She had come for an answer to a curse. She found a legacy of love buried in the roots of a tree. She had wielded the power of life and death, and in the end chose to build life. The final surprise came not from the village, but from the lab. Back in Zurich, her team's analysis of the blood samples, taken with full consent this time, revealed something extraordinary. The unique genetic markers in the population, including the one that carried albinism, showed a rare natural resistance to a different, even deadlier family of viruses. The very genetics they had persecuted held a key to future cures. Amara merged the data with the notes from her original discovery. A new research vector was born. She named the initiative the Adana Project. The curse, fully understood, was transforming into a gift for all of humanity. The last scene is not in a boardroom or a forest, but on a video call. Amara in her Zurich office, Eleanor in her London home, and Adana in the newly built clinic in the village, the white walls bright behind her. They are talking, laughing, three women woven together by loss, love, and a choice to heal rather than hurt. Amara had returned as the richest woman in Africa, but the wealth she found was not in her bank account. It was in the answer to her question, finally given not by an elder, but by her own life. The curse was a lie, the cure was love, and the most powerful drug of all was forgiveness. So what is the true lesson of Amara's return? It's that the most dangerous curses are not supernatural forces, but the stories we tell ourselves. Stories that allow us to dehumanize the different, to exile the vulnerable, to mistake fear for wisdom. Her wealth was not her billions, but her refusal to become the monster they feared. She took the very thing they called a curse, her difference, and transformed it into a cure, not just for a fever, but for a cycle of ignorance. This story echoes a painful, real-world truth. In parts of our world, people with albinism still face persecution and violence driven by the same ancient superstitions. They are not characters in a myth. They are human beings possessing not curses but incredible potential. Amara's fictional journey asks us a very real question: how many breakthroughs, how many cures, how much brilliance has the world lost because we were too afraid of someone who looked different? True power isn't found in domination or revenge. It's found in the strength to break the cycle, to return with an open hand when you have every right to return with a closed fist. To build a clinic where you could have built a monument to your pain. That is the ultimate redemption. Her story ends with a question meant for all of us. What outdated story are you still believing? What potential in yourself or in others are you dismissing as a curse because it doesn't fit a narrow mold? If this story made you question the lines between justice and mercy, between a curse and a gift, then you understand its purpose. Don't let the conversation end here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more journeys into the heart of what makes us human. Because sometimes the most powerful act is not to conquer the world that rejected you, but to heal it.